a book called The Dream of the Earth, which is both the title of the book and one of the essays in Thomas Berry's book. And in his introduction, he writes, "I am concerned with the earth itself and its inherent powers in bringing forth a marvelous display of beauty in such unending profusion, a display so overwhelming to human consciousness that we might well speak of it as being dreamed into existence." And his dedication in that book was equally precious and wonderful. He wrote it and dedicated to the great red oak beneath whose sheltering branches this book was written. Another book called Creation Walk includes a little piece in it written by Brian Grogan. It's a piece written by one of the astronauts of 1969, Russell Swigart. And he said, "You could not but be touched by the indescribable beauty of the earth, turning peacefully on its axis, without borders or conflicts, so awesomely beautiful and fragile." And the next slide, Sean. Now, all the way from Athlone. In this one single teaspoonful of beautiful soil, 1 gram, it can hold up to 1 billion bacteria, several yards of fungal filaments, several thousand protozoa, and scores of nematodes. Our fragile earth. And the next slide, I'm calling it a timeline. Because in my little input, I want to look at it through one particular lens. I must have the timeline in front of me, which I have here. We will see 697, a date that we'll always remember after today. And we'll see it ends with 2024, today's launch. We'll see there St. Francis. And we'll see there 1992, the Rio Summit. And 2013, the lens I'm going to look through in a particular way, the election of Pope Francis. Because he had a particular way of looking, and he brought about something, not only within the Catholic Church, but within the world, by writing his famous letter to each one of us, to each person of goodwill, called Laudato Si. And so the fact that he wrote it and issued it in June 2015 was very significant, before COP21 in Paris. The famous agreement, the peace agreement, the climate agreement of Paris. Because in his document, he writes in a way, in an emotional way and in a challenging way. Like St. Francis, he calls the earth our sister. But he says, the sister cries out to us because of the harm we have inflicted on her by our irresponsible use and abuse of the goods with which God has endowed her. And he says, in a blunt way, in a church document, the earth is beginning to look more and more like a great pile of filth. He can be blunt. So it's a call to action. And he works through all the different problems that the world is facing, the interconnected ones. And so he has said something that in the biblical Genesis story, which has influenced not only people today, but people all the way down the way, it appeared to justify the interpretation of it, the domination of the world, because we humans were at the top of a pinnacle. So the rest was all something that we could justifiably, because we were obviously at the top of that pinnacle, we could dominate it. He completely overturns that interpretation and says instead we are called to a role of tilling and keeping, which is caring and looking after this gift, this fragile world and earth. And of course, who has suffered because of this incredible work that we have done to it is the poor of the world. We've heard already of as we lit the candle and had our time of silence, as we heard about the corruption from Ammon, the deaths of the children from Ed, and we reflected back to the cage of fields. What contrast, what incredible contrast. So can we shift our way? Have we come to love this planet Earth? Because he says in it in an emotional way that God has written a precious book. Soil, water, mountains, everything is like a caress of God. Maybe that's not the language you use. Maybe you're an indigenous person, but you're from some culture where the earth is precious. And he lauds this way of looking now upon the world in a different way. Not as something to be used and abused. I mean, the children were obviously collateral damage. Expendable. And so the earth is another part of collateral damage because we don't see her as our sister either. And when we think about Gaza, Ukraine, all the places we've heard, we think of landmines. Even the word itself is a violent word, a landmine. We think of the soil, the water, the trees, the creatures, the raised earth, the forests cut down, bodies decaying without the decency of burial in Mother Earth, farmlands destroyed. And even here, closer, not so far away, when we think of our rivers that we're polluting, we think of Loch Ness and the sludge. Do we sense in ourselves, this is his words, the desertification of the soil almost as a physical ailment, and the extinction of a species as a painful disfigurement? And so it is time. It is, as they say, well past the time. So this day, the 21st of September, how wonderfully chosen, the International Day of Peace. The midpoint of the season of creation, a season reflected and celebrated by Christians all over the world. It's day one of the Catholic Nonviolent Days of Peace. And of course, what else is it? The International Peace Bureau's Global Week of Action for Peace and Climate Justice. And the theme of it is, it reflects the morning, divest from war, invest in climate justice. And so now today, as we celebrate the launch of this, let us thank the three people, Sean, Marion and Liz, and the team of those around them, for the inspiration we had. I'm sure Laura and Birr and all the places in between, and people like our very first speaker, are so heartened that Birr is back on the map. Was it ever off the map? And that it's a credit to those people. And let's all try to get as many people and groups and institutions to sign this wonderful document. Thank you.